Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition, and if you'd like to join our conversation at any point, 1-800-351-1212. Around the round table, Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford. And if you've been paying attention to the news in the last hour, you found out that the FBI is now probing some new emails related to Hillary Clinton. That's an announcement from FBI Director James Comey. Jason Chavez, in a tweet that I found on Twitter, said the FBI Director just informed me that the FBI has learned of the existence of emails that appear to be pertinent to the investigation, so the case is reopened. Penna, Dexter, what do we think about this?
Well, I know what Donald Trump thinks, because in a speech after this announcement, he said he was commending the FBI for opening it up, and he then said, now, for the rest of my speech, which is going to be very boring.
Kelly Shackelford.
It's, this is big news. I don't know what it'll lead to, but it's certainly, if anything, it's a reminder to everybody before they vote. And people had this thought, but the Trump stuff got so crazy that I think a lot of people forgot this. But what most people said when they heard Hillary Clinton was running, they were like, I don't want to go through another 4 years of all it follows the Clintons wherever they go. There's going to be story after story after story. They go, we have to go through 4 years of that with her as president. They're like, I'm just so weary of that. Well, this kind of reminds people that with the Clintons, because they don't follow the law, the rules, this kind of stuff tends to be with them, whether it's Travelgate or whether it's Whitewater or whether it's, you name the numerous scandals. This is what you'll get in the presidency. There'll be one after another out of these, because they don't feel like they have to follow the rules. And so that's not a good thing to get the last week before the election.
I might just mention, too, for some of you younger listeners, you might say, Whitewater? What are some of those? Well, we posted a while back a piece that was in WorldNet Daily of the 22 major scandals of the Clintons, because a lot of those happened in the 1990s. And if this is the first time you're going to vote, maybe you're 18 years of age, 20 years of age, you wouldn't even know about Travelgate or Whitewater, things like that. So you can read about that on the website if you'd like.
And I think this is, everybody's going to want to know more. And I don't know how much the FBI is going to give out on this, but
oh boy,
the question is, do they say this when they just find some emails and aren't sure, or do they say this when they uncover new emails that, this is what my guess is, that they find new emails that they think there is a decent possibility that this changes the whole conclusion.
Sure.
Some of the WikiLeaks.
Yeah, why
the
else would they do it?
Yeah.
Why
so
bother?
It's different. Because I think a lot of people will just say, well, they've gone through a lot of emails. Okay, they're going to go through some more emails. I just don't see them doing this just because they found more emails. I think it's got to be they think there's something in the email that actually changes the conclusion, of the investigation.
We've had this drip of WikiLeaks emails that have been revealed, and the John Podesta campaign manager emails. And I think that it's sort of solidifying and clarifying a message that the Clintons don't change, number one. What they've done in the past has come all the way up to today, all the way through the State Department. Her being Secretary of State, there was really never been a pause in their activities. They've really peddled their influence, and they've gotten rich by doing so. And so, this won't stop. And I'm sort of wondering if even that would have, not that it would influence them legally, but the idea that if the FBI had something new and they sat on it and didn't reveal or didn't look into it again, they could be open for an awful lot of criticism because, they're already seen as part of the Clinton campaign in a sense. But I think that's sort of dicey for the FBI right now. And, seen as so politicized.
Sure.
And so in a sense, I think to maybe even just cover themselves, they did this.
Well, and what's interesting is the last, I don't know how many days it's been now, but it's actually more like they're actually, the focus has always been on some Trump something that really had very little to do with the election. And so none of the other things, the WikiLeaks, none of that was kind of really getting coverage because they were covering, some woman coming out with an allegation against Donald Trump. And in the last few days, that's all changing. I mean, number one, you had the Obamacare, news, which was somewhat of an explosion. So here, Trump is in the danger of losing Arizona, a very conservative state. Well, their premiums there are going up by 108%,
116% if you're
116.
27-year-old,
and
can't go any higher than that.
And so that's big news, right
Yes.
there. And I think
in Arizona,
and
and in
50%,
Oklahoma, Tennessee, I mean, a lot of these places. Yes,
yeah,
go ahead.
some of the key swing states are some of the biggest numbers. So you had that. Then you had. Actually, the media is starting for the first time to cover some of these WikiLeaks, even the New York Times, and they're covering the foundation and the fact that only 60% or 60-something% of the foundation, outlays during that year were for foundation or for charitable. The rest it was all them feeding off of it, which is, people give to your foundation and then you pay your family and everybody else. And so that's starting to come out. And then now you have, they've uncovered new emails. And so this is really turning right now as far as just the media coverage and how information is getting out. And it's not some sort of circus Donald Trump issue now. It's really on specific issues, and for the Clinton campaign.
I guess you have to kind of wonder, is it too late?
Yeah.
I mean, really, it's a lot of people have voted already.
Yes.
There's a huge
By the
proportion of
end of
people
this
that
week,
have.
maybe 10 million may have voted. Yeah, go ahead.
But Kim Strassel in the Wall Street Journal today talked about the Clinton Foundation. She said it was starting to show itself to be an unregistered super PAC for the Clintons. And, I think the message is because if it's out there enough, people start to understand it. I think it takes a while for it to register in people's minds. So I don't know, again, if it's too late or if people, that haven't voted yet are going to be affected by this. I mean,
$1 million gift from Qatar, or some people call it Qatar, $1 million gift to Bill Clinton for his birthday. You start looking at these things, and then $1 million donation to the foundation, and all of a sudden there's a meeting with Secretary Clinton.
Right.
I mean, I think most people get that and can understand that pretty easily. It's not real complex, and so that, and I don't know how people are going to take the emails thing, because I think they kind of already know, and they already think she's guilty, and
either made up their mind yes or no on it. Could be.
But I think that what this adds is, oh boy, this, more of this, it's going to go right through the administration. This is going to be 4 years of this and probably another 10 of these type things. And that's what it's reminding people who have lived long enough to live through the Clintons before.
Well, let's take a break. But, they weren't the only ones worried. We have one WikiLeak of an email where Chelsea was concerned what people would think about how they were paying her dad. So we'll take a break. Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford, more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
In a thought-provoking new ebook, Christian Overman addresses the important issue of the lost purpose of learning. He begins with a 19th century quote from Princeton theologian A.A. Hodge, who said, "It is self-evident that on this scheme, if it is consistently and persistently carried out in all parts of the country, the United States system of natural popular education will be the most efficient and wide instrument for the propagation of atheism which the world has ever seen." This statement by Hodge certainly turned out to be prophetic. Christian Overman points out that before the federal government took over the public schools, education was primarily a Christian endeavor. That isn't to say that all teachers were Christian, but it does mean that there were certain foundational ideas about God and the world that were part of education in America. Now, when we turn to the topic of Christian education, we find that sometimes it hasn't done much better. The reason is the acceptance by so many Christians of a sacred secular dualism. They put spiritual things in the sacred realm and things related to the physical world in the secular realm. You end up with Christian education where the class begins with prayer, but the teaching is essentially no different from secular education. The academic material is similar to what is provided in the public schools, but only has a little bit of Christianity sprinkled on the top. Christian Overman is pleading for a holistic Christian education. Here is how he would evaluate a Christian school. He says he would ask the headmaster, "What specific training have your teachers received for designing lesson plans that will help my children see God's purpose and intentions for what it is your teachers are teaching?" Most headmasters could not give a good answer to that question. You need to get a copy of this ebook because it not only identifies the problem, but offers specific solutions. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From PureFlix, I'm Not Ashamed. Rachel Scott's life was taken at Columbine High, but her story lives on. Rated PG-13. Now playing.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, we started with certainly something that just came down a while ago, and that is, of course, the probe of the Clinton emails. But the program that we really had planned is now starting, and that is we always talk about religious liberty. And Kelly, I just have to apologize. We could not wait till Friday to talk about Dr. Eric Walsh. And the phones have blown up, partially because I also read the piece by Michael Brown, which you've posted today, Pastors Are Coming for You. And I've had people calling and saying, I would never think my pastor would ever turn over his sermons to the government. And again, for people that are not familiar, you can give us a little bit of a background. But again, he was appointed as the district health director for Georgia's Department of Public Health. Then they wanted his sermons. They distributed them. And then they said, well, we're going to terminate you. And of course, what's so interesting is now the state has been saying they want to see the sermons, but if he wasn't terminated because of the sermons, why did they want to see the sermons in the first place? Kelly, help us out.
That's a great question. Yeah, when all the people were talking about the Houston Five, the pastors who had their sermons subpoenaed and all this, I was telling you, Kerby, and others, I was going, we've already got another one of these. Because the start of this lawsuit, what a lot of people don't know is, Eric Walsh, Dr. Walsh, just a great guy and an incredibly talented and credentialed person. You can see their own. We've got now all of their information, from the state of Georgia, saying we've got to figure out how to get this guy. They were like, this guy. They looked at all the applications and they were like, if we have to go get more money, we're going to go get more money. Because this is a high quality guy.
He's our man, yeah.
And what people didn't know is when we filed the lawsuit, we didn't just have so and so said that they fired him for the sermons. We had copies of their emails from one state official to another saying, okay, which sermon, will you cover this sermon? I'll cover this one. We can all read this tonight and then, go from there. Divvying up review which of his sermons at his church. And so that's how it started. And so, and of course, then, if you've been doing what we do which I have for 27 years, I mean, you know that a lot of times people then are very, very good at trying to rationalize how it really wasn't about. So they started to try that approach. Well, it's really that he didn't tell us that he had this other thing he was doing. So it really was irrelevant that they were sermons that they all reviewed. And then they send out this, a demand for a copy of all of his sermons and his sermon notes and everything connected to it. It would include, by what they asked for, he would actually have to hand over his Bibles because he's written notes in his Bible.
Yeah, I heard they wanted his Bible. That just cracked me up.
So we had a press conference this week. And
we have the link to it from a day or two ago, so people can go on Facebook and even watch it live if they want.
They can. You can rewatch it if you want to. And we had not only do we have Eric Walsh there and Jeremy Dice, our attorney on the case, and we had the attorneys from the area that are in Atlanta that are lead counsel on this. But we also had leaders from the Georgia and the Atlanta area, pastor leaders, and Dave Welch from one of the Houston Five, because we wanted him to talk about what happened there and how this is, in his view, this is worse. This isn't a mayor. This is the attorney general and the state of Georgia doing this. And so I would encourage people to get this, go to Point of View, get the links to this, and share this with other people so they know what is really going on out there, because I think people are shocked by this, but this is not the first time, right? I mean, this is happening now. This is beginning to happen. And, Jeremy said something at the end of the press conference. I was in D.C. actually at the time. We had some stuff we were doing there. And so I watched it just like everybody else can watch it, like you were talking about the Facebook Live. And at the end, he said, you got to ask yourself, is it okay if your employer says, I need to see a copy of your notes from your Sunday school class or from your life group or he said, because then that's what now is okay. And I thought that was a great way to think, well, this is a pastor. But if it's okay for an employer to say, I want to see copies of your sermons to a pastor, I want, and again, he wasn't working as a pastor. He was working as a director of public health. Yeah. If they can ask him for his sermons, then they can ask you for your Sunday school lessons or from the youth group lessons you taught or from your notes, theological notes, whatever. I mean, this would open up to everybody. And so this is something that affects everybody who goes to church.
It's real. I mean, I think it's really bad if you're a Christian and you think about your pastor being harassed in this way, or anyone who's ministering to you or your fellow Christians. But that is a very good question to ask, Kelly, and that is, how does it affect the average Christian?
Very good.
And, it does. I mean, this is bringing it down to people's individual freedom to conduct what God wants them to.
One comment is they said this is essentially akin to ransacking the office of the pastor looking for his sermon notes. And actually happened, in Nazi Germany with Martin Niemöller and others. And that's what's so shocking to people, where they think that, and the thing is, again, they put it in writing. I mean, it wasn't like something somebody said or implied. I mean, you can look when you go to our case page, you can look at exactly what they asked for. Now, I'll point out, because of the explosion over the past 2 days, the attorneys for the state of Georgia have now contacted us and decided that, well, they don't necessarily need his sermons and his sermon notes, but they're refusing to back off all the other stuff, including any contracts he has with his church or his denomination, or any agreements, any religious credentialing. They're still asking for all this stuff that's totally inappropriate they're not backing off those things, just the sermons and sermon notes.
Let me ask one more question, because you talk about you have the written material, but if I remember you telling me the story, when they called him up to fire him, they didn't hang up. And so you actually have the audio of them laughing and talking to each other for a moment after they terminated his employment. So you've got that too, don't you?
Absolutely. Yeah. They called and didn't even talk to him. They left him a message. Firing him. I mean, again, think of this. I mean, you're a renowned, you're very respected, and because of what they're doing and sort of making you radioactive and controversial, and Eric Walsh says this, he said, I knew this was the end of my career after all he'd given his life, because he knew that now, in light of what they did, that he was now considered radioactive because he believed that, like, marriage is a man and a woman, and he said that in sermons. And so when they fired him, and then, as incompetent as their firing was, it was equally incompetent. They didn't even hang up the phone, and they thought they hung it up. Then he can hear them laughing about this. And he said that was the first time in all of this that he wept.
Yeah.
Because he said he knew, what this meant for him and just how cruel that was. And so, incredible that this is still going on. And it's just fascinating because Governor Deal, this is the governor who vetoed the religious freedom legislation a year or so ago because they don't need it.
Yeah.
And now they've got this happening, and it's not just happening, it's happening by the state of Georgia, the governor's attorneys. Not only that, but you've got Kevin Cochran in that case with the fire chief and what's happening to him. And so, boy, everybody needs to be looking at the governor out there, I think, and saying, boy, were you wrong about, do you need religious freedom help in Georgia?
Family Research Council points out that there's a new attorney general about to be appointed by the governor in the state of Georgia. So that appointment now, perhaps with the outcry, could be influenced by this.
Again, I asked the question the other day, what's happening in Georgia? You got Kelvin Cochran, who was the Atlanta fire chief, who, by the way, is African-American, was fired. And then you got Dr. Eric Walsh, African-American, and he's basically fired by the Georgia Department of Public Penna, Dexter, and Kelly Shackelford. The first article there is one that will take you to the newsroom information on First Liberty. You can go to firstliberty.org/newsroom or just go to our first link. It's fascinating. And for those of you that have access to Facebook, many of us watched the press conference, and there were some really great comments there. So Christine Tang starts you out, and you get to hear from Jeremy Dice and some of these other people that you've heard about all these years. And so I would encourage you, if you're on Facebook, it doesn't take much to just do that search, and you can find that as well. We're going to take a break, and I might just mention I've got sitting around the table here those that are going to join me in the Alaska cruise. As I mentioned, we have those brochures out, and you can find out more by going to our website, pointofview.net. But if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We have a lot more to cover, but if you have some comments about Dr. Eric Walsh and religious liberty, we'd love to hear from you. We'll be right back.
From Pure Flakes comes I'm Not Ashamed. April 20th, 1999, the worst school shooting in U.S. history at Columbine High School. One victim was Rachel Joy Scott. Her life was taken, but her story lives on.
Jesus gave his life for me, and I'll give my life to him.
Based on her personal journals, I'm Not Ashamed, rated PG-13. Now playing. More information at I'mNotAshamedFilm.com. Kerby recently wrote about the growing threat to our religious freedom. I hope you read that letter. There are 15. I think a lot of us are down about the mess surrounding this election, but we dare not take our eyes off these issues, and Point of View will not. But we need your help. We really need your help right now to press on. Please visit pointofview.net. Click the Donate Now button or call 800-347-5151 or send a gift to Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Talking about religious liberty for a few more minutes. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Weekend edition, Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford. I might just mention, those of you that do support First Liberty, probably receive this First Liberty in Action newsletter, and in there it has some material about Eric Walsh, and certainly we'll talk about that. One of the other stories that you have there, of course, is sweet cakes up in Oregon. Just a few weeks ago, I was in Oregon, and we were up there talking about Aaron and Melissa Klein. But we have a case, Kelly, out of the UK that's a little bit similar to that. Can you explain that?
Yeah, it's basically the exact same thing, and they just where everybody was waiting for their high court to issue the final ruling, and they ruled against this Christian couple. And what was interesting is the UK is much more liberal even than the United States, but the outcry has been against the decision. And even by gay rights leaders, because they actually understand that if you can punish someone because they would not express a message that they didn't want to express, that is a power that the government then has over everyone, and how dangerous that is. And so it's really interesting. You can go, there's like an editorial in the Telegraph, the London Telegraph. There's just a number of different articles, and I've kind of been shocked because they're they're more liberal, considered much more liberal, and yet you have an understanding over there of the impact on everybody's freedom, and so they're saying this is bad, and they're actually advocating changing the laws or doing something in the UK.
Mm.
Amazing. When you look at what's going on here and how Christians are being attacked, and the weapon that's being used is really the homosexual and also the gender identity agenda. That's what's being used now as a weapon. And, it's perhaps the case that since it's been, I guess more tolerant or open in the UK and in European countries, that they've moved on beyond this, or they've seen how it doesn't work. I don't know why, but I saw the video. This young couple was lovely in the way that they were sort of graciously spoke about not that they were happy with it, but they spoke about the ruling. And I think in a sense, when you start to see, these are just normal people like the Kleins. I mean, they're parents of 5 kids. Mm-hmm. They're Christians. They're kind of normal, real, down-home people who've had their lives affected by this. It was interesting this week. Many people have probably seen this sermon by one of the pastors here locally, Tommy Nelson of Denton Bible Church, talking about what's at stake in this election and how the country has moved away from, or really right now, we are deciding between sort of the remnants of a theistic worldview and a very secular worldview in the culture. And we've had an administration that for 8 years has forced on us really the devaluing of our faith in culture. And so, the idea that number one, in the election, it makes a difference what you do, but also that you continue to fight these battles as First Liberty Institute does, that, you have to stand. Every time you stand, you are making an impact. You're doing something eternal, really. And so, each one of these cases, however small they may seem, is important and adds to sort of the body of what the culture sees and how the culture, who now, there's a certain generation who doesn't even get exposed to some of the morality unless they're a believer that we were just exposed to. That was just kind of cultural morality. It's gone.
That's for sure.
Tommy Nelson,
it's called The Continental Divide, and it's by Tommy Nelson. It takes about 10 pages to print out in the transcript.
Watch it, right?
Or you can watch it on YouTube.
It was cool to watch.
And so either way, you can get a hold of it, and we can put it on the website if you'd like.
A lot of people probably do know of Tommy Nelson, no matter where they are in the country, because he became pretty well known, I think, because of his Song of Solomon series, which was incredibly well done and very popular. And then he's been on Dr. Dobson's show a number of times. He's a very well-known pastor. And so I found it interesting because we're seeing pastors who usually do not even sort of stray into elections or any of the political stuff. That's not their interest.
He's one that really didn't.
Now coming out really strong about not the politics, but the biblical nature of what's happening right now, and the necessity to stand, even in the political arena, to stand for those biblical principles, and how a Christian is supposed to do that. A lot of pastors are starting to speak to this, which I think is really important. And Penna mentioned these cases and the different things and how the elections affects that. I would point out, we send out a deal every week at First Liberty on sort of an update for the week. It's called Liberty Watch. And just for those who already get it, they'll get it. But if those who don't, they can go to firstliberty.org and sign up for it. The one we're sending out tomorrow is going to have a list of the 5-4 cases right now at the Supreme Court on both sides, which will switch one way or the other, and what that will mean for people, so that people can at least see what are these decisions that just with one justice are going to change. And that way people can go, okay, now I can understand, a little bit about, the choices we're making in these elections and how they impact real cases.
I just mentioned I did 2 days of commentaries on those 5-4 decisions, including the Mojave Cross case and the Hobby Lobby case and Little Sisters of the Poor case and Helder case and McDonald case and all these ones, so that people can have that. And so, again, get it from First Liberty, or if you sign up next week, 2 of my commentaries are on that.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I guess I just got to say this, though, that Kerby's going to actually be in that same pulpit.
That's right.
This weekend.
That's right.
That's right. This Sunday. And I'm using the 5-4 cases again. So, again, once you write a commentary, you might as well give it.
Gotten viral. The Tommy Nelson sermon is all over the place, and so now Kerby's going to walk into the midst of craziness.
Well, they prepped their congregation for your sermon.
Well, we're talking about pastors. What about this one? The first article, of course, is about Dr. Eric Walsh. The second one is one we quoted from yesterday, but I want to give it to you. It's by Michael Brown, Pastors, They're Coming For You. And he says, okay, I know the title sounds conspiratorial and inflammatory. Is it a shock headline? He said, well, I'll admit it, I did come up with a title to shock you. But then he goes through and says, it's not that shocking because, okay, Dr. Eric Walsh, Kelvin Cochran, and then he talks about Angela McCaskill, Crystal Dixon, and we can go through this long, long list again, that if you are in a person in a church, we used to say that we had concerns about people that changed it from the idea of freedom of religion to freedom of worship. But at least freedom of worship still sort of implied, I thought, that what you said inside the church was safe. But, Kelly, that's not even the case, is it?
Yeah, no, that's the Eric Walsh case is an example of that there really are no, if you can't be safe in the sanctity of your church, then, that you're not going to be safe anywhere. And so this shows that there really are no limits to people who want their agenda and don't really care about religious freedom and want to create a country where religious freedom is really not there to protect you. And that's why I think there's such a quick resonance when the Eric Walsh, demanding of his sermons this week occurred, and why it just spread all over the country what was happening and the outrage in articles like Michael Brown's article.
So, my question is, what do you think will happen next? Because I know that the Georgia state government is being sued and, for this violation of his religious liberty. So what will happen?
Well, we're in litigation. We're in discovery. They're filing, we'll be all filing motions and all that, unless the new attorney general that's going to be appointed comes in and says, what are we doing? This is crazy.
That would be nice.
Yeah. But if not, and if they don't, we would love, the best thing for Dr. Walsh would be for them to settle the case and realize, okay, this was wrong. Let's correct this and let's let Dr. Walsh get on with his life. But, so far, they want to fight, and as is evidenced by demanding his sermons, his contract with his church, his denomination. All this stuff that you're like, well, how is this relevant? It seems to me like you're just like giving us more evidence that you're engaged in religious discrimination because they fired him clearly because of his faith, and then they say, no, we didn't. But we want all your sermons and your agreements with your church and your religious credentials. That's really important to us. So I don't know. We've got some schizophrenic situation going on at the state of Georgia with the AG's office.
Well, after the break, let's get into the election. And first of all, we've got a couple of examples of election fraud. You know, that supposedly doesn't happen, but we have in Chicago people voting from beyond the grave. We have a few people that have actually been busted for this. One that's actually going to be serving 40 years in prison for election fraud. So sometimes that does take place. And then we'll look at where we stand in this election. So there's a lot more to cover. And if you would like to join the conversation, of course, 1-800-351-1212. We have a link, of course, to firstliberty.org, and of course our website is pointofview.net. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll look at the presidential election, also some of these senatorial and congressional elections. A lot is happening, and we'll cover that right after this.
Once the elections are over, momentous decisions will need to be made regarding our healthcare system. The prevailing law is the Affordable Care Act, which has got to either be fixed or repealed and replaced. Any fix would eventually take us to a single-payer national system. Phil Gramm was a 3-term United States Senator from Texas. He served 14 years on the Senate Budget Committee and chaired the Senate Banking Committee. His recent opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal describes an earlier attempt to pass a national healthcare system. He knows what he's talking about. He helped lead the opposition to the 1993 Health Security Act. Senator Gramm describes that proposal as, and I'm quoting him, a comprehensive plan for the government to take over the healthcare system, with program details and cost control measures precisely defined. Since then First Lady Hillary Clinton was tasked by her husband to spearhead the effort, it became known as Hillary Care. The legislation would have set up regional healthcare purchasing cooperatives. These co-ops would agree on treatment guidelines and implement cost control measures. Everyone would be required to pay into them. Providing treatment outside what was determined permissible by the regional cooperative would bring civil penalties. Accepting a separate payment for such care would bring criminal penalties. Doctors desiring to provide care not covered within the system would be forced to operate completely outside it. The bill never became law. It stalled in the Senate. Fast forward 18 years. The Affordable Care Act was not nearly so precise. Senator Gramm writes, the Obama administration left as many details as possible to be written during implementation, after Obamacare became law. Back in 1993, Senator Gramm teamed up with Senator John McCain and Senator Paul Coverdell to oppose the Health Security Act. They informed the American people and members of Congress of the ways in which the plan was inefficient and unaffordable. Senator Gramm says that those arguments did not resonate. What sunk it, he says, was the extraordinary loss of freedom entailed in the law. In his column, the senator reminds us that what really killed this bill was its plan for a national control board, which would have determined every allowable benefit and treatment. The board's decisions were to be final, not reviewable by any agency or judge. The 1993 Health Security Act would have immediately closed down the market for individual and small group health insurance. The Affordable Care Act did not do this. The original understanding was that people would be able to keep their health insurance if they wanted to. But the law's implementation is making that impossible, with skyrocketing premiums and massive losses, forcing insurance companies out of its markets. So, the next Congress will have to decide, repeal the ACA and bring in a free healthcare market, or nationalize the system and cause the loss of freedom that was considered unacceptable in 1993. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford, and if you would like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We heard Penna Dexter's commentary just a minute ago on this issue of the Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare. We'll get to that in due course because it relates again to the campaign. But I did mention just real quickly that we do have not only evidence of voter fraud, but we also have individuals that have now been either indicted or in some cases prosecuted for it. Chicago, we used to joke about that. Well, Susie Sally was buried in 1998, yet records show she voted in Chicago 12 years later. Victor Croswell died in 1994, but records show that he's voted 6 times since then. And Floyd Stevens, voted 11 times since his death in 1993, and that's just in Chicago. talked, of course, about Colorado and some of the other situations, but it looks like at least some action is being taken. These are two women now that have been actually charged with election fraud in Florida. One who had the task of opening the envelopes of the Miami-Dade County voters, which was caught actually illegally marking ballots.
Wow.
And then this other individual who was filling out forms for people without their consent. And then, of course, one that's actually led to a conviction. This is in the state of Virginia, former resident there, facing up to 40 years in prison after he allegedly used fake names to fill out voter registration applications. And Kelly, didn't you have a case that you knew a little bit about in Houston where some of that was taking place?
It's still actually not over yet. We passed it on when we started doing just pure religious freedoms cases, but Jim Bopp is now handling one of them. Yeah, I mean, and I think a lot of people heard, or some people might have heard, there's this order in New Jersey from an old case. It's like 30 years old or something. I mean, it's back there, where the judge, part of the sort of agreement that they all agreed to in the end, is the Republican Party agreed not to have poll watchers there to watch for fraud. That was part of their agreement. So they've been prohibited from doing basic, poll watching, which is you don't do anything. You're just there and to make sure that nothing really untoward is happening. Well, because of Donald Trump's statements about, it's a crooked election, people need to go and be poll watchers and all this, the Democrats now see an opportunity, and they actually filed with it either yesterday or the day before yesterday in that New Jersey court saying, look, they're violating the court order. You got to tell them that they can't do any poll watching. Or, I mean, I'm guessing they're wanting to extend this injunction that's been in place that's supposed to be up, I think, this year. This is like the 30th year or however many, and they're now seeing this as an opportunity. So, so yeah, it's fascinating, and everybody's trying to take advantage of. I think when Trump talks about rigged elections, he's not really talking. I mean, these are part of it, right? Yeah. I mean, I
think he's talking more about the media, don't you think?
He's talking about the media. Mm-hmm. He's talking about the establishment and just how they're trying to stack everything against him. And then they try to make that he's saying, that everything's going to be illegal. Well, things might be illegal. I mean, for heaven's sakes, we've got some people who are engaging in activity that many people think is criminal, like his opponent. And so he's just not putting anything past anybody. But yeah, there are real cases. They are around the country. I know Hans von Spakowski has written a book on this. I mean,
John Fund. I
mean, there is information out there, and there are people who do this. And this is something we should all be diligent about to make sure that everybody's vote counts by not having people, fill the rolls with people who can't vote. And I know was it Kaiser? What was the, Pew, just this week, I think, or within the last week or so, came out with all these voter registrations that are false.
That's right.
I think it was maybe 1.5 million people who are dead, who were on the rolls, and then maybe another 3 million or something like that who were registered in more than one state at once. Mm-hmm. And just a lot of this that really, I mean, come on. We're in a technological era now. We could take care of this stuff.
That's right.
And yet we haven't.
Dead people voting. I always said no representation without respiration. I mean, that's at least my philosophy. Penna, what about this? We're going to take some phone calls, but we should pay attention to what we can do even in this late hour. I've encouraged some of our listeners to go out there and be poll watchers.
Yeah.
Pay attention.
I mean, there isn't a national electing system. So some people are saying that Trump is talking about, well, maybe hacking into the system. Well, there are a lot of systems. Every state runs its own elections. Mm-hmm. And, if you don't live in New Jersey, yes, you should go out and be a poll watcher. You should volunteer. You should be part of this. This is a patriotic country. People get excited about elections, and, maybe you're not excited about this one, but if you want to keep it honest, then volunteer and go help out and do that.
True the Vote's, I think, the name of her group.
Yes, mm-hmm. Catherine Engelbrecht.
And they encourage a lot of people to do poll watching. Mm-hmm. If you don't know what that is, it's basically you go... You report to the people that are there. There's usually an election official, both Democrat and Republican there, and you're not allowed to take pictures of people. You're not allowed to say anything to people to try to influence in any way, but you're allowed to sit there and watch and make sure, and if something is wrong that you see occurring, you're allowed to go to the election officials and say, hey, such and such is happening here. And I know in a few of those, they saw, people who were the election officials actually telling people who to vote for, which is wrong,
True.
And so that's
Keep
why
them honest.
That's why you have people there to make sure that nobody's doing things that they shouldn't be doing.
Very good. Let's take some phone calls. We'll head first to Florida, one of those swing states we've been talking about. Phil, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you, sir, for taking my call. We're talking about the difference between principle versus politics. When President Obama did his executive order making gay marriage legal, I heard a African-American pastor in Mississippi come out and he said, Obama certainly did the wrong thing this time. He was standing on principle at that time. A few days later, I heard him back on TV, and he said, that's just one issue. That was politics over principle. And I think that's a problem today. We've lost our sense of principle for politics. Shame on us.
For sure. What about this? Because the executive order actually was just a statement saying that they would no longer abide by the Defense of Marriage Act. And I was at a meeting the other day, Kelly, where somebody who is a lawyer was just saying, I am so concerned about the loss of rule of law and what is happening now, almost the demoralization and the politicization of the Justice Department. You see the same thing, don't you?
No, yeah, I think that's something to be very, very concerned about. It used to be that in the Justice Department you had people, and it didn't matter who was president, they were career lawyers whose job was to, be in the Department of Justice and to make sure the law was applied. And even if they didn't like it, that's not where they went. And it didn't matter if Bill Clinton was president or if it was, Ronald Reagan or whoever, that's what they were going to do. This president is the first time that we've had where you've basically had the Justice Department politicized to where they've just said, well, we're not going to defend that law. Well, you know what? I mean, almost every law that they can run up against was passed by some other president. So that's incredibly dangerous for them to decide which ones they're going to defend. Add that to the FBI, which many people think is now maybe completely politicized, or at least somewhat politicized. We're close to, you lose the rule of law, you lose your country. And so that is very important, and I think one of the important things in the election as well.
Let's take a break. When we come back, Penna Dexter's commentary today, fixing healthcare. Of course, we've talked a little bit about that, but we want to hear from her and get some perspective on if that might have an impact on the election. And all sorts of articles that we have mentioned are on the website. And as you go there, if you'd click on that button that says donate, as we said, so often before an election, nobody gives, and we certainly have seen that here. So if you can help us out, we would greatly appreciate it. Let's take a break. We'll continue our conversation with Penna Dexter and Kelly Shackelford right after this.
This election has been one of the most divisive in history. Even close friends have been driven apart because they dared support the wrong candidate. Jesus said the world would know his disciples by how they love each other. I'm asking you to do something today as a sign of unity. Step up and support the Truth Team at Point of View Radio so we can be a beacon of truth in 2016 and beyond. America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. Visit pointofview.net. Make a difference by giving as generously as you can, or call us 800-347-5151. Our next president will likely appoint at least 2 Supreme Court justices, maybe even more. We need each other, and I believe that we need Point of View, and Point of View needs you to invest in the mission. Please join us today. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour, weekend edition. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford, and Penna, your commentary, which people can obtain by going to the website pointofview.net, viewpoints, fixing healthcare. And this surprise, I guess it shouldn't be too surprising, but it was, I think, maybe shocking for a lot of people that, as we pointed out, if you look at some of the expenses that people are going to now incur because of the Affordable Care Act, oftentimes referred to as Obamacare, if you're a 27-year-old, even buying the second cheapest silver plan, you would have your premium increase 116%. Oklahoma, 69%. Tennessee, 63%. Minnesota, 59%. And so we really kind of maybe need to go back, and that's one of the things you do in your commentary, take us back to even 1993 and Hillary Care. So tell us what you've learned.
I just thought it was so interesting when I saw a piece by former Senator Phil Gramm of Texas in the Wall Street Journal about this, and it reminded me of, because, you know, we were doing Point of View back then on Hillary Care. Hillary Care was the sort of socialized medicine plan, and Hillary Clinton, and Phil Gramm points out, she had a task force, and they had a very prescriptive and complicated plan.
Mm-hmm.
But Obama learned from that, and the Democrats learned from it. So when they wrote the Obamacare plan, it was general. It was generalized. And then all the regulations were supposed to be written as it was implemented. Well, we know how well that's gone, because we've seen, number one, a lot of controversial religious freedom inhibiting type regulations have been written. So many of the regulations have been controversial. But what's happened is, so we've had to litigate some of those. So what's happened is Obamacare has not balanced out so that it pays for itself well at all. And the insurance companies, many are losing money and having to pull out of the exchanges. And then people's premiums are going up. And this was announced this week. Big shock. Generally, all over the country, premiums will go up. In some states, it's just unbelievable. Plus, the insurance companies are affected to such an extent that even if you're not part of Obamacare or part of the exchanges, it affects you. It's affecting the entire healthcare system. And so, it was just interesting to see that something has to be done about it. And of course, that's kind of being kicked down the road. It'll be done after we have a new president and a new Congress. And, there's two ways you can go: repeal and replace, which is what, Donald Trump is really saying to do. Just get rid of it, start over. He wants health savings accounts. There are a lot of free market ways to build a healthcare system. And the other way is probably go incrementally. There would be some bailouts of insurance companies. There would be bigger subsidies for people buying. But eventually, because of the way the system is set up, it would just have to go to, there would have to be a public option, which was not included in Obamacare. And eventually it would just be a single payer system. It's the only way to make Obamacare work. And of course, that was the plan all along. I mean, really, to have it fail so that we would have the full socialized medicine that the left has wanted all along. So we've got a huge stark choice here. I don't know if people really understand it who are voting, between government-run universal health care, which would not be as good and would strip a lot of freedoms away from us. And that's why back in 1993, Phil Gramm said when they began to expose how treatments would have been specified by the federal government and by these regional councils, and certain treatments would not have been allowed, and you couldn't go outside the system unless you wanted to pay full price for everything. All that freedom inhibiting sort of part of Hillary care is coming back. If Hillary Clinton is elected president, it will come within, a certain amount of time as Obamacare fails. We will get that. We will have this mammoth system. We'll be taxed to death for it, and it won't be good. So, that's one of the decisions we're making. I don't know if people really understand that we're making that decision, but that's another reason to think about who you vote for in this election.
You mentioned Phil Gramm. I got to tell my favorite story of Phil Gramm. He was a senator from the state of Texas, and when this was being debated, there was a bureaucrat from the Department of Health and Human Services, which used to be Health, Education, Welfare, but at that time was HHS. And he was saying that I think I can make the best decisions about my own children. And the bureaucrat, this woman from the Department of Health and Human Services, said, "Oh, no, Senator Gramm, we care as much about your kids as you do." And he said, "Really? What are their names?" And the whole place broke out in laughing. Because the point he was making, Kelly, we've talked about this before, is who can make the best decision? Obviously, you can make the best decision about your own health and your kids. And this sort of patronizing, "Oh, no, we care about your kids as much as you do." Yeah, what are their names?
Yeah, no, that's this is why there are certain things that are God-given rights. Like one of the rights we recognize in this country is the God-given rights of parents to decide, how to raise and train their children. And they're not children of the state. And so you give rights to the ones that have the responsibilities to carry those things out. And so, you're going to, we talked about this with Obamacare. This is it's bad medicine, right? We all know competition is better. Government monopolies is not a good idea. Anything the government puts its hands to gets less efficient. It doesn't advance at the same level as if it's in the free market system. But what a lot of people don't talk about is the loss of freedom. When the entire country is now dependent upon the government for the health care they receive, that's
like Medicare, Medicaid, and the VA. Are those the models you want to use?
That is really a loss of freedom, because now you don't have the decision.
Sure.
The government has a lot of power over you. And they could decide whether you get a life-saving medical treatment or not. They can decide whether your children get life-saving medical treatment. So in addition to it being bad medicine, bad economics, all this, which I think everybody who understands the free market system at all knows is bad for freedom, because the government has this incredible power over you.
We also have to look at how this was sold. Obamacare was sold. You can keep your doctor, you keep your insurance company, everything stays the same. And it certainly has not happened. And I think, Obamacare has been around now long enough that people know that. People know we were really lied to pass it, and it's not going to work.
Well, one of the things Bill Clinton said out there on the campaign trail, I thought I'd give you a direct quote just before we take a break. Bill Clinton says, "So you got this crazy system where all of a sudden 25 million more people have health care than the people who are out there busting it." In other words, people that are working. Sometimes 60 hours a week wind up with their premiums doubled and their coverage cut in half. And that's exactly what's happened.
That's what's happening.
Back to Kelly's point about competition, we found that now some of these situations, you only have one health care provider, so you don't even have a choice. And that's obviously not the way you want to go if you need competition, right?
Absolutely.
Well, let's take a break. And when we come back, we'll get into some other issues. Perhaps you have some thoughts about this. And one of the other articles we've posted here was a really good piece. It's entitled, I think mistitled, "Why Evangelicals Calling for Trump to Withdraw Are Wrong." But it reminds us that when you vote for Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, you're not voting just for them. You're voting for more than 7,000 people. And so when we come back from the break, let's talk about really what is happening. And that is 7,000 people in addition to the hundreds that will be on the federal court and the Supreme Court. So let's talk about what that might mean. And then, of course, we'll take some of your phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
In a thought-provoking new ebook, Christian Overman addresses the important issue of the lost purpose of learning. He begins with a 19th century quote from Princeton theologian A.A. Hodge, who said, "It is self-evident that on this scheme, if it is consistently and persistently carried out in all parts of the country, the United States system of natural popular education will be the most efficient and wide instrument for the propagation of atheism which the world has ever seen." This statement by Hodge certainly turned out to be prophetic. Christian Overman points out that before the federal government took over the public schools, education was primarily a Christian endeavor. That isn't to say that all teachers were Christian, but it does mean that there were certain foundational ideas about God and the world that were part of education in America. Now, when we turn to the topic of Christian education, we find that sometimes it hasn't done much better. The reason is the acceptance by so many Christians of a sacred secular dualism. They put spiritual things in the sacred realm and things related to the physical world in the secular realm. You end up with Christian education where the class begins with prayer, but the teaching is essentially no different from secular education. The academic material is similar to what is provided in the public schools, but only has a little bit of Christianity sprinkled on the top. Christian Overman is pleading for a holistic Christian education. Here is how he would evaluate a Christian school. He says he would ask the headmaster, "What specific training have your teachers received for designing lesson plans that will help my children see God's purpose and intentions for what it is your teachers are teaching?" Most headmasters could not give a good answer to that question. You need to get a copy of this ebook because it not only identifies the problem, but offers specific solutions. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From PureFlix, I'm not ashamed. Rachel Scott's life was taken at Columbine High, but her story lives on. Rated PG-13. Now playing.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
We'll spend a little more time on the election, and one of the pieces that we've posted here has to do with a piece by Miriam Bell. Very good piece, and again, it talks a little bit about this issue, first of all, of there have been various pastors that have been calling for both Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton to step down. And I think in some respects people then would be very excited because most people like Mike Pence, and most people, even if they're not all that conservative like Tim Kaine, but you don't have that situation. But then very quickly she goes into something else, which I think is important for us to understand, and that is you are not electing, when you're electing a president or maybe a governor, just that individual. You are actually electing all the people that he or she puts into office. Let's talk about the president. More than 4,000 political appointees that are going to run various agencies and departments, and then more than 3,000 appointments to boards and commissions. And that doesn't even include what I want to talk with Kelly about in just a few minutes, and that is all the people that would be put in the federal judiciary, including the Supreme Court. So, Penna, first of all, we've got to recognize that you have to pay attention to personnel, and we so often around here say personnel is policy, isn't it?
Yes. This is something that in my own heart and mind as I look at the election has been huge because Donald Trump is such a blank slate in a sense. He's come out with more policies in this contract, but he hasn't been able to explain policies in detail, or maybe he just doesn't want to. So I have always, like in the back of my mind, thought, okay, what are the type of people that are going to come in and actually do the business of government? Who's he going to appoint? And we know about his list of Supreme Court justice picks, which have made a lot of people feel better. I know people that have been appointed to the transition team, for instance. They're people that I think are very conservative and Christian and wonderful. And in a sense, the body of people who will run the government, and she mentions the numbers here, which are huge. This is Marion Bell's piece. We vote for the 4,000 plus political appointees who will run the agencies, departments, and programs. We vote for the 3,000 plus appointments to boards and commissions the next president will make. We vote for these 300 plus who will be appointed to the judiciary, including the Supreme Court. So this is what, we have to consider. And I think that, there's no names or not that many names given, but we've watched him appoint a vice presidential running mate. We've watched him appoint his latest campaign manager, for instance. And we know some of the people that he's called in as religious advisors. And so I think that, that is something that we always have to consider. These are the people that are going to do the business of governing. And since he's not a politician, but a businessman, I think it's even more the case. I think he'll be like a Reagan in a sense that he'll be a little bit hands off on the nuts and bolts.
I'm sure of it.
He'll be more big picture if he was to be elected. So, but this is a great piece, very informative.
And I might just mention that even today, there's people speculating in the Clinton campaign saying that she would probably appoint Joe Biden as Secretary of State. Donald Trump's campaign in the past has said they might appoint John Bolton, so there's a difference. You look at the Attorney General, I'm thinking she might keep Loretta Lynch for no other reason because that might have saved her. And who would be the Attorney General under Donald Trump? Well, they're talking about Chris Christie or Rudy Giuliani, or maybe Rudy Giuliani would be the Department of Health and Human Services, or Homeland Security. Health and Human Services almost for sure is going to be Ben Carson, don't you think? A member who, of course, was under Obama, Kathleen Sebelius, is probably the most pro-abortion governor from Kansas. So all the way down the line, I'm seeing really stark differences in who would fill the cabinet. By the time you get down to some of these other areas, again, I think we'd see some significant differences.
Yeah, I think this article is really an important article. I mean, just for the main point that people generally miss, which is when they elect the president cannot sit in 4,000 seats, okay, and make all these decisions. So the president is really, can make some big decisions, right? But most of what's going to go on, the vast amount, is who they appoint. And so, we're talking about thousands of people. And so, everybody's obsessed with the morality or immorality of Trump and the morality or immorality of Clinton. And again, I've said before, I think you kind of go, okay, well, they both are unqualified there, so let's move on to the next issue. What are they going to do? To me, this is what are they going to do? This is who are they putting in power in these different positions. And I don't care whether that's the Supreme Court, whether that's the Secretary of Defense, whether that, you name it. A lot of those people are not, the president's not looking over their shoulder every day saying, hey, I want you to do this versus this. It's like, are those going to be conservative people? Are those going to be liberal people? And that's the big difference between the two candidates, I think, is all those appointments and what their people will do. And by the way, the transition teams for both are working as we speak. And the people on those teams are from sort of the grassroots. It'll be more of the liberal grassroots on the Hillary side. It's already been announced, for instance, that Ed Fulner at Heritage Foundation, people like that on the conservative side are somewhat leaders of the transition team. They are mapping out all these appointments, who will be put in these positions. It's not Donald Trump and it's not Hillary Clinton. So
they're too busy campaigning anyway.
Yeah, so if people
opening a hotel,
if people could see those plans, I think it would immediately get past all this personality stuff, and people would see, oh my gosh, this is a very different direction, and I think they would realize that they're very thoughtful directions because there's people planning this, people in the base of their parties that have been dealing with these issues for years. They're mapping out exactly what's going to be done in the first 90 days in office. And it's dramatically different between the two.
You're voting for a team, and when Jeremy Dice was in here a couple of weeks ago, I used the example of sometimes we like the team, but we don't like the coach, or we like the team and we don't like the owner. And he said, Dallas Cowboys. But anyway, you're a Baylor fan. You've had two different coaches at Baylor this year. I mean, there have been all sorts of things. We all recognize what it's like sometimes when we don't like somebody at the top, but we also recognize we like the team. And I hope that at least when you vote for your governor, and 14 of states actually have governor's races, so the same thing applies for a governor. It's very different if you're voting for a state legislator, you're voting for a member of Congress. But for a governor or a president, you really are voting for a team. And you have to ask yourself, what's going to be the team, and who's going to be in the IRS? Are they going to make Kelly's job easier or harder? Who's going to be in the Justice Department? Are they going to make Kelly's job easier or harder? And I think you probably know the answer if you've been listening to this program.
I remember when this campaign was just getting going, and we knew that there was going to be questions about Hillary Clinton's email server at home. And I remember Kelly said, I wish that we didn't have to have these be such an important part of the campaign. I wish we could look at what really is important, which is the issues and the platforms and the people. And, that's really true. And of course, I think it's gone way beyond all the personal issues have gone way beyond what any of us ever thought they would. But they're there, and they're probably what many, many people are voting on. I do wish, and one of the things that the pastor in this wonderful sermon, Tommy Nelson's sermon, said was that we need an educated populace in order to have a really working democracy. And so that, once we wrote the Constitution, we also began public education to try to educate people. And we don't have a populace that's really well educated on what's at stake here. So, they are voting on some peripheral issues. And so I hope people will pass around this article. They can go to pointofview.net and get it, to educate people on what's really at stake here and, what is really going to affect our lives. It's these appointees. It's the platforms, because that's where the lower down ballot people will take their cues for policy. So these are very, very important issues.
I just mentioned again that the October issue, if you have received it and you can make copies of it, actually gives you a comparison of the two platforms. And as we've pointed out before, they're about as different as they could possibly be.
The issue of the Outlook.
The Outlook issue in October, and it's called The Republican and Party Platforms Are Miles Apart. I'm old enough to. I remember back in 1968 when George Wallace said there's not a dime's worth of difference between the Republicans and Democrats, and he was saying between Richard Nixon and Hubert Humphrey. Well, I think there was a dime's worth of difference back there, but there's $1 billion worth of difference now. There's almost no overlap. And so to look at those platforms, to which again come from the grassroots, these are delegates that go to their precinct convention, they go to their senatorial convention, they go to the state convention, they go to the national convention. And anybody that says, well, they don't pay attention to it, go back and look at the 2008 Democratic platform and ask me how many issues on that Barack Obama was not able to implement. And in many cases, he was not able to implement, for example, closing down of Gitmo. He tried to implement immigration reform, didn't go anywhere. But you look at most of those others, Obamacare, all those things.
Been pretty effective at what he had planned on doing.
Tells you pretty much where it's a blueprint and a roadmap for where that particular candidate's going to take the nation. Let's take a break. We'll take some phone calls, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take those calls right after this.
From PureFlix comes I'm Not Ashamed. April 20th, 1999, the worst school shooting in U.S. history at Columbine High School. One victim was Rachel Joy Scott. Her life was taken, but her story lives on.
Jesus gave his life for me, and I'll give my life to him.
Based on her personal journals, I'm Not Ashamed, rated PG-13, now playing. More information at I'mNotAshamedFilm.com. Kerby recently wrote about the growing threat to our religious freedom. I hope you read that letter. There are few things more important. Many ministries say 2016 has been tough, very tough. I think a lot of us are down about the mess surrounding this election, but we dare not take our eyes off these issues, and Point of View will not, But we need your help. We really need your help right now to press on. Please visit pointofview.net, click the Donate Now button, or call 800-347-5151, or send a gift to Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221.
Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Talked about a lot of issues, but focusing now on the election, presidential campaign. Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford. Let's go to Alabama first. Dennis, thank you for calling today.
I'd like to thank y'all, number one, for your show. But another thing I like to ask, how come all of this stuff come out on Donald Trump about these women and stuff, and it just come out here recently? But why didn't it come out during his campaign when he first started?
Good question.
Good question.
Unless it's just being held in abeyance, waiting for when we could have an October surprise. Good question.
Well, I think all of us know the answer to that question. The answer to the question is these people were being collected by the Clinton campaign for a long time. You've got the
paying Haiti. They're paying the women instead of sending the money over to help these people from the earthquake and stuff.
Yeah.
Well, we know because we've got. I mean, you've got the WikiLeaks now, and where they specifically said that the only candidate they thought that they could beat was Trump. They even, I think Podesta said something like, even somebody as like Ted Cruz would beat us, meaning they thought he was like not a great candidate,
and definitely Rubio they were afraid of.
Oh yeah, and so they knew they wanted Trump, and so that's why they held all this until the exact right time. Now, that's not to say the truth or untruth of what the ladies are saying. It's just to say that it is obviously odd. If these people had all these things, through the years, you would think these things would come out. And somebody clearly was cobbling everybody together right at the time of the campaign, and everybody, I think, knows who that was. That was the Clinton campaign.
Right.
Not that the Trump campaign wouldn't have done the same thing if they had the same information.
Good point.
I mean, look at Bill Clinton.
Yeah.
Look at the $800,000 he paid out for having an affair with a juvenile 13-year-old girl. They was talking about that on TV here on their last debate, about him paying $800,000. But if that had been a normal human being out here, they would have been in prison and then been registered as a sex offender. And that's what he should be registered as.
That's the difference, I think, is Donald Trump was not going to be a politician. That was not his plan. He was living his life. He's definitely, was not living a down-the-line moral life. And Bill Clinton wasn't either, but he was going to be a politician. That was his focus, and he had lots of people around him to shuttle him to his different meetings, and he had, people covering things up for him. Money was paid, all sorts of it. So he was laying it out that way, where Donald Trump was just living this life. And, he's the nominee. And so, that's part of it. That's part of the package that we've got. And we have to look at what's at stake for the country now.
While we're talking about elections, let's get into some of the polls for just a minute. The other day, I put out a piece that Rudy Giuliani wrote about, and that is, he said every one of the polls they ever ran on him were wrong, even when he lost. It was interesting because he said, for example, one, he was down by 12, but he lost by 3. I won by 4. I was down by 4, but I won by 4. I was ahead by 12, but won by 18. So he's raised the question about these polls. The one that tends to be the most accurate, at least over the last couple of years, has been the Investor's Business Daily. And then the other one we've posted here by Nate Silver. The Investor's Business Daily still has Hillary Clinton up 44% to 41%. And a lot of this depends on whether they ask for just 2 or 4, because we are talking about Gary Johnson and Jill Stein. Mm-hmm. When you get to Utah, you have a 5th, and that's Evan McMillan, who possibly could actually win in Utah the 6 electoral votes.
Which would just hurt Trump in that situation.
I would think so. Yeah. But again, if you actually had a situation where he took enough away from both of them in terms of electoral votes, and neither gets 270 electoral votes, Kelly, you've schooled us on that. You go to Amendment 12, the 12th Amendment.
You go to the House, and if it went to the House, it would be Trump. But if nobody gets to 270 electoral votes, which I think is highly unlikely.
I think it's unlikely, too.
Then it goes to the House. And it's not a vote in the House based upon the number of congressmen. It's every state gets 1 vote.
California and Rhode Island both get 1 vote.
Exactly. Now, the difference is, everybody knows when they've looked at these maps that most of the map is Republican, because most of the states are Republican, because all the flyover country is Republican. Mm-hmm. And so in that situation, you would have most of the state delegations going Republican, and therefore you would end up with Donald Trump. But again, I think that's highly unlikely. I think the only chance, looking at the polls, and look, even Nate Silver and their deal has Trump at almost 20% chance of winning, which I think most people would see as really high.
Yeah.
Most people are like, well, he doesn't have a chance.
Yeah.
They've got him at 20%.
Hillary's already measuring the curtains and already telling you who their Secretary of State's going to be. And all the mainstream media said, this is over. Why are we even bothering to vote on November 8th?
And I think a lot of people...
That's to suppress the vote.
Yeah, I think so.
I think a lot of people think that way and act that way. But the thing that we don't know, and I don't know that you can poll this, is sort of the phenomenon, and the way Trump puts it, and I think he's right, is this is going to be a Brexit, right? Mm-hmm. You don't know if there's some sort of energy that it's hard for polling to tap into, and for instance, it's the Bradley vote. It's the
the Bradley effect.
Yeah, it's the I don't want to. I mean, if you ask people, how many people will not tell a pollster they're voting for Trump, although they're really voting for Trump?
How many people do you know that are voting for Trump that don't have a yard sign in their yard?
Yeah, everybody.
Or a sticker on their car.
That's right.
Or the missing 5 million that Karl Rove talks about, because you had 5 million individuals here that are white male who do not have a college degree that haven't voted in the past, but that message resonates with him when they ask the polls. So do you have some missing people? Do you have the people won't say that I'm not going to vote for the first woman for president, or I'm not going to vote for Donald Trump, the Bradley effect. And, that's one possibility. So it's hard to see.
I think that's its only chance, and I wouldn't put that at a high chance.
No,
so
I don't either.
Ultimately, I think
you have to assume that Hillary Clinton is your next president unless a miracle takes place. He's got to really run the table with all the toss-up states. And does that happen in the next week? I'm not sure, but we'll see.
It only happens if something like we're talking about, there's something that people aren't seeing. I will say this. I felt like the last election, I felt like a lot of people were praying, a lot of people were fasting, and I felt like Mitt Romney was ahead. And then the hurricane came through right at the end, and it really changed the momentum. You had the Christie hugging Obama incident and all that, and I think most people would say it changed the election. People refer to hurricanes as, quote, acts of God. So I do think that God answers prayer. And I mean, he might not answer it the way you want him to answer it, but it might be you need judgment now, or I'm going to give you mercy now, or that's up to him. But we just need to be in prayer and each do our duty, because in addition to voting for president, there's all these people down ballot. There are people in your community, if you're listening, who are believers, who are running for office and counting on you to vote for their values, their beliefs. And if you don't, you're really letting them down and those that believe like you down. And so you really should go vote no matter what, all the way up and down the ballot.
I got my sample ballot here. I've already voted, but there are 25 different offices you can vote for here. And so when a person says, well, I can't vote either for Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton, and I'm not going to vote for third party, so I just won't vote. Just think about all these other individuals. You have, of course, state representatives and U.S. representatives and U.S. senators. 34 states have a U.S. Senate race. 435 have a race for the House of Representatives. 42 states have state representative races. In Texas, for example, they have 150 people in the Texas House, 31 in the Texas Senate. You have some judicial races all the way down to constable. And to say, well, I'm not going to vote because I don't like who's at the top of the ticket, I think that's shirking your responsibility.
Well, and let me real quickly say, I think about your vote, and let's say you look at Clinton and Trump and you say, I don't like either one of them and their character or their morality or whatever. Pretend like you're the deciding vote and ask yourself, okay, should I not vote, or should I look at this and say, well, okay, I'm not comfortable with either of those. Let's look to what might happen. And there's so many of these issues that are going to occur. What's going to happen as a result of who you appoint? And just one, for example, let's talk about the Supreme Court. Under Hillary Clinton, I think you're clearly going to have a change on the Second Amendment. You're clearly going to have a change on a number of these religious freedom opinions that are 5-4. Switch to the other side under Trump. I think there's a 50-50 chance that within 4 years, because I think he would appoint probably 2 or 3 justices from that list, I think Roe v. Wade would be overturned. It would go back to the states. So what's more important, a person's morality or the morality of those issues that are going to follow and that are going to, actually, play out in your life? I mean, we're talking about, with abortion, 1.2 million a year. So get past just the people and go to the morality of the issues and vote on those things as well.
Great wisdom. Let's take a break. We'll take some phone calls right after this.
Once the elections are over, momentous decisions will need to be made regarding our healthcare system. The prevailing law is the Affordable Care Act, which has got to either be fixed or repealed and replaced. Any fix would eventually take us to a single-payer national system. Phil Gramm was a 3-term United States Senator from Texas. He served 14 years on the Senate Budget Committee and chaired the Senate Banking Committee. His recent opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal describes an earlier attempt to pass a national healthcare system. He knows what he's talking about. He helped lead the opposition to the 1993 Health Security Act. Senator Gramm describes that proposal as, and I'm quoting him, a comprehensive plan for the government to take over the healthcare system, with program details and cost control measures precisely defined. Since then First Lady Hillary Clinton was tasked by her husband to spearhead the effort, it became known as Hillary Care. The legislation would have set up regional healthcare purchasing cooperatives. These co-ops would agree on treatment guidelines and implement cost control measures. Everyone would be required to pay into them. Providing treatment outside what was determined permissible by the regional cooperative would bring civil penalties. Accepting a separate payment for such care would bring criminal penalties. Doctors desiring to provide care not covered within the system would be forced to operate completely outside it. The bill never became law. It stalled in the Senate. Fast forward 18 years. The Affordable Care Act was not nearly so precise. Senator Gramm writes, the Obama administration left as many details as possible to be written during implementation after Obamacare became law. Back in 1993, Senator Gramm teamed up with Senator John McCain and Senator Paul Coverdell to oppose the Health Security Act. They informed the American people and members of Congress of the ways in which the plan was inefficient and unaffordable. Senator Gramm says that those arguments did not resonate. What sunk it, he says, was the extraordinary loss of freedom entailed in the law. In his column, the senator reminds us that what really killed this bill was its plan for a national control board, which would have determined every allowable benefit and treatment. The board's decisions were to be final, not reviewable by any agency or judge. The 1993 Health Security Act would have immediately closed down the market for individual and small group health insurance. The Affordable Care Act did not do this. The original understanding was that people would be able to keep their health insurance if they wanted to. But the law's implementation is making that impossible, with skyrocketing premiums and massive losses, forcing insurance companies out of its markets. So, the next Congress will have to decide, repeal the ACA and bring in a free healthcare market, or nationalize the system and cause the loss of freedom that was considered unacceptable in 1993. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford. Let's head to New Mexico this time, KYCC. Vanessa, what would you like to share with us today?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to talk with you. I would like to say to the body of Christ in America to stop being so hypocritical, as if anything that you think, that we think that Donald Trump has done could be found of us in the body of Christ. And who else but him? I wouldn't have picked him, but who else but him could have withstood all the intimidation, all the evil that has been thrown at him by the Clintons, because he's the only one who has been able, had the courage, can't be bought off, can't be intimidated, to expose the level of corruption that I think is in both the Democratic and the Republican Party myself. So I think it's time that we start to look at that and think, do we want someone who can be a bully to the world leaders that need to be a bully? And the other thing about him that I have appreciated is he's been completely honest about his change of his opinion that changed about being pro-choice, and then he knew a couple who was going to have an abortion. They didn't. He saw the way that child grew up, and it changed his view. I mean, how honest can you be? And to me, that and the sanctity of marriage are so important. So to hear your commentators say that if he were elected and appointed who he thinks he appointed, that Roe v. Wade would be turned over. To me, that's enough. Put your personal things aside and think of, like you said, what's best for the country and especially unborn babies. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Vanessa. Kelly, you made that comment, and I think you're right. Let's just, again, recognize we've got a hole right now. Antonin Scalia is not there. Mm-hmm. Then Ruth Bader Ginsburg is 83. I don't see any way she lasts 4 more years. You have Anthony Kennedy, who's 80, and you have Stephen Breyer, who's 78. It's easy to come up with 2, 3, maybe 4 people that the next president, either Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, will put on the court. And doesn't that pretty much set the court for the next 30 years?
Yeah, I think this election is going to set the court for the next 30 years, which I think, will make the next presidential elections not really anywhere near as important because I think our country will be somewhat set in place. I mean, well, let me put it this way. I think that if Trump were to win, I think the next elections will all be kind of normally important. I think if Hillary Clinton were to win, I think the elections will become less important because I think her appointments to the Supreme Court would mean you'd have a liberal lock on the judiciary at the Supreme Court. And what liberal justices unfortunately do at the Supreme Court is they legislate. So rather than us make decisions in our voting, they kind of make decisions for us. They do things like Roe v. Wade, where they look and they say, well, okay, there's no right of abortion specifically in the Constitution, but we're going to find one because we think there should be this right. And when you do that, you sort of weaken the importance of elections and things like that. So I really think this Supreme Court thing is the biggest issue because there's so many 5-4s. The court is 4-4. It's going to tip with just the next one. Mm-hmm. And again, do I think, let's say Trump won and he appointed a Scalia-like person, do I think that they would overturn Roe v. Wade, even though there's 5 of them? No, because I think somebody would back out, and that's kind of the way things happen.
Sure.
But if you appoint not 1, but 2, 3, maybe 4, I do think it would happen. It would happen on the other way with some issues. There's lots of people on the liberal side do not like Citizens United.
Oh, that's the first one to go.
Right?
If Hillary can change that, yes.
If Hillary appoints a justice, I mean, that'll be gone. The Second Amendment case, the Heller case, 5-4, individual things that are close, voter ID. I mean, we could go down a long list.
Gender identity, death penalty,
marriage, gay marriage, 5-4.
Yeah.
So a lot of these things
down the pike
can go one way or the other, and they probably will, based upon the president and the appointments to the Supreme Court.
I think I want to add something since we're coming to the end of the show about the election, because I do read some of the folks who they make an argument that if you vote for Donald Trump, you're tainting yourself. And so believers who really trust God need to vote, for somebody that they could really be proud of. And the problem with that is that that person will not be president and probably will put Hillary Clinton into the White House. And so I just want to because we had this caller and she had made some wonderful points, but, it's not that all the Republican Party has in it what maybe the Democrat Party is. That one party may be more corrupt than another. They aren't all the same, so you don't equate it. You're not voting for someone, though, that is like you. You're voting for the country as a whole. You have to take into consideration many factors to vote. And so I just think there's a message out there to believers among some people that you're tainting yourself by voting for someone who is not as moral as you would like them to be. But you're not. You are not doing that. You have to be sort of informed and savvy and think of what's at stake for the country, because there's a lot at stake. And, yes, we trust God, but God also uses us. He's given us this country and we're stewards of it. So I just want to encourage people right now when they vote to consider all these factors, not just a couple little things that are actually going to throw the election to the left for decades.
And, I think it was Eric Metaxas. I'm trying to think of who said this, but he just said it's bizarre, the idea that Christians can't work through people that are of different morality for a common goal. I mean, that happens all the time. And I think the example was, against Hitler, how, Russia was, we had to work with Russia to get rid of Hitler. Okay. And so the point is, the idea that that God always wants us to work only with people that think and believe just like we do to accomplish goals is very much, not true. And so, and when it comes to elections, like Penna was saying, you should only vote for somebody you feel really good about. I mean, no, you're just not going to get that, right? I mean, there's only one person I would feel really good about, and that's because I'm a little deceived, and that would be if I voted for myself. The only person we think is really right on everything morally is ourselves, or if Jesus was running or something. So they're going to be flawed. They're going to have problems, and in this case, I agree. Both these major candidates have serious flaws. And so I think you've got to say, okay, I'm not voting on their personal morality. I'm voting on what they're going to do and the morality of the decisions they're going to make and what that's going to mean for our country, what that's going to mean for other people, what that's going to mean for my children and my grandchildren. That's the morality, I think, that is much more significant in what will happen than looking at, Hillary Clinton's lack of trustworthiness, corruption, etc., Donald Trump's sexual exploits, etc., and some language in this. I think much more important, and those things I think are important. I believe in what the Lord lays out as standards of morality and godliness and character, but you got to compare that to lives of people, to issues like the very first thing that God creates in Scripture, institution-wise, which is marriage between a man and a woman. Abortion, we can go down the long list. Those things are huge moral issues too, and I think you've got to look at those things because that's what really happens as a result of who you elect.
Penna Dexter and Kelly Shackelford. We've mentioned a couple of times Tommy Nelson, and Tommy Nelson will be in studio with us next week, and so we'll have a chance to talk about his sermon and mine, and we'll compare notes. So that's one of the individuals we'll have in studio. And again, I might just mention that if you enjoy this roundtable discussion, we're going to have it on a ship going to Alaska in August. So again, you can find out more about that on the website pointofview.net. I want to thank Andrew and Catherine and Shamila for the help behind the scenes. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you back here on Monday.
This election has been one of the most divisive in history. Even close friends have been driven apart because they dared support the wrong candidate. Jesus said the world would know his disciples by how they love each other. I'm asking you to do something today as a sign of unity. Step up and support the Truth Team at Point of View Radio so we can be a beacon of truth in 2016 and beyond. America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. Visit pointofview.net. Make a difference by giving as generously as you can, or call us 800-347-5151. Our next president will likely appoint at least 2 Supreme Court justices, maybe even more. We need each other, and I believe that we need Point of View, and Point of View needs you to invest in the mission. Please join us today, pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.